order at 5:36 p.m. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format, which enables the Budget Committee to meet, hear from the community, and take care of its business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. It is a privilege to be here tonight. I urge all of our committee to keep that at the forefront of our minds as we do this work. Not every member of our community has equal capacity to participate in these meetings, and in many cases, the decisions we make here will have the strongest impact on those members of the public who are least able to attend. Thank you, everyone, for considering this fact when we deliberate. Tonight's agenda includes time for public comment. If members of the public would like to speak during public comment, please virtually raise your hand or press *9 if you joined by phone. And we have scheduled till 5:40 to raise your hand. We will use the intervening couple of minutes to go ahead and approve our minutes from the prior two meetings, minutes from both the March 4th meeting, which were updated, and also minutes from the April 26th meeting were included in the packet sent on May 8th. Did anyone have any recommended changes from what was included in those packets? Ryan.
Finally.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't believe I was the, excuse me, Ryan in attendance on that meeting, but I think that Mr. Moore
God,
was.
We have, sorry.
With a correction to which Ryan was in attendance, do I have a motion to approve the March 4th minutes?
I'll move, sure.
Thank you.
Do I have?
That was moved by Ryan Konofsky, seconded by Elijah Kaczynski. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. The minutes are approved. And do I have a motion to approve the April 26th minutes?
I move that we approve the April 26th minutes.
Thank you, Eliza.
And I will second.
Seconded by Ryan Konofsky. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. The minutes are approved. We are now preparing to begin public comment on the 2023-2025 proposed biennial budget. This period is for those wishing to make comment on the proposed budget. If you wish to speak during public comment, you must have virtually raised your hand within the next minute or pressed *9 if you joined by phone. The period to do so is now ending. The meeting moderator will unraise or disallow any requests made to speak after this time. Each person will have 2.5 minutes to speak. And our staff is going to be randomizing the requests and giving us the order of speakers shortly. In order to allow as many people as possible to speak, please be succinct in your comments. Are we prepared to put up a list of speakers?
Hi, I think so. We're going to start with the first two speakers, and then Vicki is going to share her screen with the order after that, okay?
All right, that works. Thank you.
Thank you. First, we'll have Amanda Linian, followed by Vanessa R. Amanda, I promoted you to panelist. It may take a second, but you will be able to allow yourself to come off mute and share your video. Thanks.
Is this good to go? Great. Yay. Hi, everybody. My name's Amanda Ligon. I'm in Ward 4. Dear council members, my presence today is a love letter to our libraries. The new budget proposes a 25% decrease in funding for the library over the next 2 years. Other than the recent levy, this budget is the only funding that they receive, which is fairly unique as most other places can rely on sponsors or other things to make up the difference. If we fail to fund the library to its fullest potential, we're failing all 177,000 Eugenians. Research has consistently shown that for every $1 we spent funding the public library, the community sees nearly a $5 return on investment. To be clear, these are not abstract benefits like how libraries help build a stronger democracy or how they inspire curiosity in people. We're talking cash money and greater prevention against these types of budget deficits in the future. A well-funded library raises surrounding property values, helps develop an intelligent workforce, which would make Eugene more attractive for cutting-edge companies. And it also increases the efficiency of social services. Honestly, y'all, I went through the budget plan almost in its entirety this week, and I can hardly imagine how much pressure y'all are facing to fix the current problems. Eliminating from the library, however, is sure to only increase that deficit over time and decrease the overall level of equity within our beautiful city. Our library in particular offers more to our community than I could possibly ever capture in 3 minutes. But just to name a few extra things, they also work with the Eugene mission to teach computer literacy skills. They partner and early literacy programs in our most oppressed areas. And I've even seen them give out free dog leashes to people who need them. I mean, I could go on, but hopefully you see my point. In y'all's Monday meeting, you gave proclamations claiming support for LGBTQ and Two-Spirit, BIPOC, and other oppressed communities. As libraries are defunded across the country in an effort to silence mostly these voices, queer voices, BIPOC voices, we have a chance with this budget to put our money where our mouth is and support our entire community by fully funding the library. This is the time when we need your effective and direct action, and we hope you'll stand with the community and protect the library today. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Next, we have Vanessa R., followed by Dana Fleming. Vanessa, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself and share your video now. Thank you.
All right, well, I think I'm here. So my name is Vanessa Ringgold, and I'm here with one of my foster kittens. This is Leola, and then I root back there. So I'm here to talk on behalf of Green Hill and the Animal Services welfare budget that is currently being cut. I'm here to advocate for its restoration, and frankly, that it should be funded 10 times the level of what it is right now. So I do work very heavily in animal rescue, primarily in something called Trap Neuter Return, which takes unneutered and unspayed cats, gets them fixed so that they stop having kittens, and we can humanely reduce the number of community outdoor feral cats in this community. So I am very saddened by what is happening with the animal welfare budget. And listening to your meeting from April 26th, I understand that Eugene is forecasting a deficit of $15 million, but to put that in perspective, it's $15 million out of 1.5 billion, which is 1% of the budget that needs to be reduced. And based on the forecast, so it's not even necessarily what will happen. But the immediate harm to the animal welfare services will have a dramatic impact on the animals of this community. And I'll also say that I'm very disappointed in the budget office. I had an excruciating back and forth with them, and they seemed unable, unwilling, or incompetent to answer my questions about why the animal welfare budget why the animal welfare budget couldn't get money from the community payroll tax. In sections, or I of the payroll tax, the animal welfare officers are specifically called out as being able to be funded by this community tax. And of the 35 items or budgets that are getting money from the community tax, 33 are getting increases to their budget, and over 23 are doubling or more their budget in this upcoming biennial. And the animal welfare services are getting cut by more than half. So I would appreciate this committee looking into why that is. Because I am so highly involved in animal rescue, I've been hearing some rumors, and it seems like possibly the police department is actively trying to sabotage one of its own, in terms of reducing the budget and preventing the animal welfare services from being able to serve the community. And I certainly hope that the community the budget committee has heard from the community about how important these services are. I think I'm out of time. Anyway.
Thank you. I'm sorry, folks. Next, we have Dana Fleming, followed by Maria. Dana, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute and share your video now.
Good evening. Not sure why it's not showing my video. There we go. I am a resident of Ward 2, Councillor Keating's ward. My name is Dana Fleming. I wear many hats in our community, including having the honor of being recently hired to be the executive director of the Eugene Public Library Foundation. Tonight, I'm coming to you wearing the hat of a parent of a Eugene Public Library employee. My daughter has worked at the Eugene Public Library for almost 5 years now. She and the other dedicated Eugene Public Library staff also don a number of hats in a very high-stress job. When they chose to work in the library field to promote literacy and intellectual freedom, they probably did not anticipate that they would also be social workers, nurses, day shelter supervisors, and conflict resolution specialists. The services they provide to our community cross over so many areas that the city prioritizes, including public safety and well-being, equity, and sustainability. EPL staff work very hard to make beautiful things happen inside and outside the walls of the libraries in our community. Library staff shine when they can translate their varied personal interest into some really amazing programming while also filling gaps of service in our community. One example already pointed out by the former speaker, Amanda Ligon, is that they go to the Eugene Mission to teach on-site computer skills classes. They also visit 4J and Bethel schools, many of which do not have a librarian on staff. The current staffing shortage combined with the proposed budget cuts to the library will negatively impact the library in many ways, including programming, which will be restricted to on-site only, meaning that underserved who cannot come into the library, like Eugene Mission clients, students at 4J and Bethel school districts, and residents in elder care facilities will no longer receive those programming services. In addition to fewer free, enriching, and educational program offerings, the impact will also be felt in longer turnaround time for circulation of materials, with not enough staff to return materials to shelves or to process holds in a timely manner. Continued staffing shortages will further impact staff psychologically and physically, and could lead to costly staff turnover. It is much more economical to invest and retain current staff than to recruit and train new hires. As you make difficult decisions in the upcoming weeks, I urge you to consider investing in these dedicated libraries.
Thank you. That concludes your time. Vicki is going to share her screen to show the rest of the list. So next we'll have Maria, followed by Sandra. And Maria, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself and share your video now. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Stephon Clark, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Dante Wright, Tortuguita, Elaborio Rodriguez Jr. Police killed all of these people and mostly got away with it. Police didn't stop Jordan Neely from being murdered on the subway last week, nor did they save the children of Robb Elementary last year or most other mass shootings. So why do we still give the police the benefit of the doubt? Why do we still pour money into their budgets? Most people in power pretend the solutions to addressing the real problems in our world are so complicated that we can't possibly do anything else, so we still have to stick with policing. Someday a person won't have to collect bottles and cans just to make ends meet. Someday we'll all live in a better world. Someday. So why not now? Where's the urgency? Why should Black and brown people, LGBTQIA people, disabled people, neurodiverse people, poor people, sex workers, immigrants, and even the family members of police have to live in fear of law enforcement? Why is it okay for them to be traumatized? Why are their lives not important enough to consider? There are dozens of organizations in the city right now who could address so many of the struggles that people have before police get involved. They could actually help with the millions of dollars that the city has access to. It could help people instead of terrorizing them. And if the business owners in this town want their own private security force, they can pay for it themselves. The institution of policing was built on the rotten foundation of white supremacist hierarchy. So stop pouring money into the police budget and fund community services that make people's lives better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sandra Yashandra, followed by Hannah Hicks. Sandra, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share your video and sound now. Thanks.
Thank you. This is Sandra Bishop. I'm sorry I could not get my Tibetan name removed before I got into the meeting, but it's Sandra Bishop, Ward 2. And other people have spoken quite eloquently about the need to fund the library adequately. And I hope, I really appreciate the difficult work that you're doing as budget committee members, but I really hope that you will use some creativity and look into the future. Defunding services like the library and animal welfare services is very short-sighted. Both of those things affect exactly the kind of people, a cross-section of people that Ty was talking about at the beginning that aren't able to be on Zoom. They're not, coming to these meetings. But the library alone is an incredible resource for people that have no other or very few other resources. You will create so many more expenses if you make these cutbacks at the library that I really hope that you'll rethink that part of your budget and come up with some ways to take the money out of some of the programs that are not, they're not showing the metrics of success. But please continue to fund the library, and please do not defund and severely hamper the animal services. They're both very necessary parts of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Hannah Hicks, followed by Ethan Klein, and then we'll share the list after that. Thanks. Hannah, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself and share your screen. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is my first time speaking at a public meeting, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm a graduate student at the University of Oregon. I live in Ward 3, and I sit on the board of the Eugene Public Library Foundation. By cutting $4 million from the library's budget over 2 years, the library is actually taking on about 13% of total cuts that the city is making. So while we know that you have to make cuts everywhere, we want to show that we believe it's disproportionately going to affect the library. Since it only represents 2% of the city's budget, but it's taking on 13% of the cuts. And I know that you believe or hope that the budget cuts will only affect cutting vacant positions that are unneeded or unnecessary expenditures, but that is just not true. I mean, we've already talked to you that patrons of all ages will feel the effects of these cuts by limiting off-site programs. And we know that there will just be in general fewer free and enriching programs and a reduction of new programs developed, which is a shame because our librarians are some of the most innovative people I have ever met. I got to speak to Sheldon Branch librarian Amy Kennedy last week about how the library is really addressing vital needs from seniors right now at a time that is so needed because the Surgeon General just released a statement an advisory about warning about the effects of social isolation and how it is leading to dementia and heart disease and all these horrible things. And the library is here to provide those social connection opportunities to older adults and to everyone. But the Sheldon branch in particular, they've launched this amazing craft program that meets Tuesday nights and Wednesday mornings geared towards seniors, and it is filled up immediately. There's a wait list. They need more space. They need more programs. We have this amazing library of things, if you haven't heard, showing more ingenuity. And we have launched or are about to launch these new companion stuffed animals for adults with memory care, with memory loss, to help them. And so these librarians are thinking outside the box. They're thinking of new ways to enrich and comfort people in our community. And if we continue down this path of cutting the library, then our community will suffer, especially our seniors. So we want to work with you. I know that we have to find where this money will come from, but at the very least, we're hoping to fund back one full FTE position actually to cover the Bethel branch that I'm sure you've heard about. But we are happy to work with you to find where we can pull this money from so that we can recover some of the loss from the library to protect the most vulnerable people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ethan Klein, followed by Carrie Lieberman, but I'm going to give a second to share the list. Ethan, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share with us now. Thanks.
Great. Can you all hear me all right? Super duper. So thanks, Budget Committee, for taking the time tonight to hear from everybody in the community. I'll try to make things short and sweet. First, I want to commend the folks that made up the budget for taking the crucial first steps to repurposing funding away from the Eugene Police Department and putting that towards really proactive emergency and medical services to really help the needs of our community members and really take the advice and recommendations from the alternative response survey. However, speaking on that point, I don't think that the repurposing goes far enough in terms of following the alternative response survey's recommendations to realigning resources from the overburdened police department to other departments and alternative public safety services, including services that enrich our communities, such as the library that's getting defunded, youth services that are getting defunded, especially from the Community Safety Initiative, and unhoused services that are seeing a reduction as well. Still, I don't know why things such as the Community Safety Initiative, why over 72% of those funds are going to reactive and punitive services, such as EPD and municipal court, and only 20% are going towards those services that really enrich everybody in the community, youth services, houselessness services, etc. So really implore you, speaking here as a member of the Eugene Springfield Democratic Socialists of America, and just as a general community member, that we should really work to dig deep and identify those areas where we can repurpose more of EPD's funding into these essential services that the most at risk and affected in our communities need, that are essential. Yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Carrie Lieberman, followed by Renee Buchanan. Carrie, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share with us now.
Okay, Carrie Lieberman, Ward 2 and Executive Director of Green Hill Humane Society. I want to thank everyone for their work on the Budget Committee and other leadership roles they serve in this community. Thank you, Councilors Leach, Semple, and Keating, who have all taken time over the past few weeks to visit the shelter and learn more about our animal welfare program. Thank you, Councilors Grove, for your participation in our recent fundraising events. I was pleased to see the memorandum about the city's animal services in your budget packet. It's a very good overview of the financial picture. In fact, it clearly highlights that Green Hill's partnership in 2012 saved the city $473,669, nearly $500,000 in its first year alone. And over the course of the past decade, the city has saved at least $3.3 million. It also highlights the fact that Green Hill has been a generous partner with the city in absorbing rising costs due to inflation and minimum wage that have greatly outpaced the revenue that Green Hill receives from the city. It reinforces the fact that cutting the animal sheltering budget makes little to no sense from a financial standpoint. From an animal welfare perspective, the memo doesn't really address the questions that arose at the last budget committee meeting around what services will be lost if the cuts remain in place. For the sake of time, I will be sending the committee a follow-up email tomorrow that includes more detailed information about the services that Eugene currently contracts for. And in brief, I will say that the proposed budget has a 57% cut to the sheltering contract. And as such, it should be expected that around 57% less city animals can be sheltered, leaving roughly 700 animals unsheltered each year. Please look out for my email the next day, which will also include my contact information. I encourage all of you to come out to the shelter to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Renee Buchanan, followed by Jesse Donahue. Renee, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share with us now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Renee Buchanan. I'm the president of the Eugene Public Library Foundation Board, and I'm a member of Ward 5. As my children grew up, I was in the downtown library or Sheldon branch at least weekly. It is a phenomenal resource in our library, in our community, for children learning to read, who are learning to learn, and providing access to books and other educational resources. The library touches so many people. In a recent community survey, over 4,000 people responded. The foundation, the Friends of the Library, as well as hundreds of library supporters are very concerned about the effects of the budget cuts to the library. I wish we were in person so we could see how many supporters were able to come. I know we had many who were planning on coming tonight, and because of the way this is set up, I don't know if there's a way to really identify who's here on behalf of the library. With the position cuts and materials and services cuts, we can expect much slower turnaround times for materials from return to shelf or in filling holds. We can expect fewer new materials. We can expect a reduction of materials available online, including databases and materials available on Hoopla and Canopy. We can expect a reduction in programming, including little or no programming outside of the library itself. We can also expect overstretched librarians who are already being asked to perform extra duties. I expect this to affect their retention rate as well as their mental health. We request a reconsideration of the budget cuts to the library. At minimum, we request a 1.0 FTE outreach librarian position who would be assigned to the early literacy program at the Bethel branch. The Bethel area needs support, and the library is set up to deliver for them. Councillor Keating submitted our request at the last budget meeting. Please let me know if there's any information you would like about this. Thank you so much for your service to our community and your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jesse Donahue, followed by Christopher Seward, and we're going to do a screen share on that list for the final time, I think. Jesse, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share with us now. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jesse. I have a speech impediment, so if the audio cuts out, it's not you, it's me stuttering. Thank you for what you all do. I don't envy your responsibility, and I support all of the pleas of the past speakers. However, I have a question for you to ponder, and I apologize for the dramatic language I'm going to use, but it's in my mind honest. If the fire department budget is cut and they lose a fire engine, which I understand is a cut under proposal, which neighborhood do you value least? Which neighborhood houses people you are most willing to let die? Which neighborhood are you okay with people losing their homes in? Currently, I understand the plan is the fire engine at 2nd and Chambers, which protects some of the most disenfranchised community members in Eugene. Or maybe the decision will be made to drop fire and emergency medical responses to our wealthiest. Due to Due to socioeconomic inequality, they are the healthiest population and the most financially able to recover from disaster. But they also hold the greatest political power, so I don't imagine they will let that stand. If the fire department cut is made, that is the decision you will be asking someone to make. You must be relieved. The decision for whom to leave unprotected won't fall at your feet. Again, I thank you for all you do, and good luck.
Thank you. Next, we have Christopher Siewert, followed by Jacob True. Christopher, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share with us now.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Okay, well, thank you. So good evening, Mayor, City Manager, Councilors, and Budget Committee members. My name is Chris Siewert, and I proudly serve as the Union
Uh-oh, it looks like we lost Christopher. He was dropped to attendee. I'm gonna, Christopher, if you can hear us, I'm gonna move you back to panelist. Thank you.
How about now? We better? Okay, let's try this again. Good evening, Mayor, City Manager, Councilors, and Budget Committee members. My name is Chris Siewert, and I proudly serve as the Union President for Lane Professional Firefighters, Local 851. Today, I come before you to address the concerns regarding the proposed budget cuts to the fire department. In the sense of deja vu, our union leadership find ourselves in a familiar position, advocating for the funding that can make a difference between life and death. Throughout the years, we have faced a proposed engine cut on 3 previous occasions. But after testimony outlining the negative impacts such a reduction would have on the community, the city leaders at the time made it a priority to find the necessary funding to prevent these cuts. The reduction in funding in the proposed budget took us by surprise and left us disheartened, especially given our current environment. Over the past 5 years, our call volume has skyrocketed, going from 38,000 calls in 2018 to 48,000 calls last year alone. This equates to an average increase of over 2,000 calls per year, with no increase in fire resources. 1981 to 2020, over a 900% increase in calls, while personnel increase of only 24%. While we acknowledge the proposal to introduce a 24/7 squad as the replacement, relying on a 2-person squad falls short of an adequate substitution to a fully staffed 24-hour engine company. Our concerns lie not in the potential benefits of investing in a squad, but rather in the decision to replace a fire engine in this new approach. It is crucial to highlight that the Community Safety Initiative was specifically designed to provide funding to enhance and improve our response capabilities rather than replace existing resources. While we acknowledge the need for innovative solutions to meet increasing demands, we must ensure that these solutions complement and enhance our existing resources rather than diminish them. The CSI City Ordinance, signed on June 11, 2019, Section 3 states that the CSI payroll tax revenues should supplement and not replace the funding used for community safety services in fiscal year 18. It is essential to prioritize and maximize our current resources before focusing on additional ones. I'm here to urge you to reconsider the decision and prioritize the well-being of our community. The safety of our community should always be our top priority. We must ensure that our fire service has the necessary resources and capabilities to respond to emergencies effectively. Closing a fire engine puts lives at risk.
Thank you. I let you go over a little bit because I think we lost some time with this switch. Okay, our last speaker is Jacob True. Jacob, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to share with us now.
Hello there. Thank you to the Eugene City Budget Committee. My name is Jacob True. I'm an organizer with Eugene Springfield chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. I live in Eugene, Ward 1. We stand in opposition to the continued year-over-year budget increases for the police department that the city of Eugene has insisted on supporting in opposition to community outcry. Cutting services that benefit the community and promote true public safety, such as from the other folks that have spoken today, such as libraries and animal control, while increasing public police budgets every year is the wrong step for public safety and wellness. If we address the root causes of criminal behavior, the government, such as yours, could actually prevent crimes and save millions of dollars on expensive downstream police enforcement and imprisonment. Research has shown for decades that more money to police does not reduce crime. The appeal of just give more money to police is neither morally nor fiscally responsible. Money spent on prevention and addressing basic needs in our community decreases the reasons that many crimes happen in the first place. Let's talk about the Community Safety Initiative. 72% of that payroll tax is planning to go towards reactive law enforcement and punitive services, such as the police, which is another 55% of the budget. Only about 20% of the CSI's nearly $46.7 million would go towards preventative and emergency services, such as fire and medical, unhoused, and youth services. Community safety starts with meeting people's basic needs. It's time that our taxes, including that from the CSI, went to funding preventative services like more housing and behavioral health or mental health providers, and not one penny more to the police. The fiscal year 23-25 general fund budget will already award the police another half $500,000 annually. CSI payroll tax continues to be unfairly biased towards the police department, giving the police department an extra $13.5 million annually, or 55 of the total CSI. Reallocate that towards stuff that actually increases public safety, including libraries, animal control, mental health care, and anything else. Thank you now. Appreciate the time. I yield the rest.
Thank you. That concludes the speakers that we have signed up for public comment tonight.
Thank you, Liz. I have a brief addendum I want to add, but first I also want to offer, since we have just a little bit of agenda time that was designated to public comment left, I want to offer any committee member who wants a direct response either to emails we've received or comment we heard tonight to be able to take 1 minute. I mean it, one. So if anyone is interested in responding, go ahead and raise your virtual hands. And to give you a moment, I also want to share stats on our emails that we've received. As of 3 p.m. today, staff reports that we've received 222 total emails on the budget, including 97 regarding our fire and EMS services, 87 regarding Green Hill and our animal welfare services, 32 regarding the library, 4 regarding neighborhood associations, and 2 categorized as miscellaneous. And I don't see any hands for direct response. Just wanted to throw at least that offer out there. But in that case, we're going to go ahead and take advantage of our extra time. And if staff is ready, we're going to move into the first of our, well, I don't know if the city manager had anything before we jump right into the presentations.
I can wait until we get to the end of them.
Okay, then we will go right ahead and jump into our presentations. We have 3 coming today. We're going to hear about our alternative response plans. We're going to hear about downtown services and about our unhoused services. So if we can start with the alternative response presentation, I hand it over to Chief Caven.
All right, thanks for having me tonight. We're going to start the presentation, like we said, on the alternative response program. So I'll move here and start sharing my screen. Everybody see that okay? All right. So part of enhancements that are in the proposed 23-25 budget are the alternative response plan, the alternative response program. And this plan was built off of the work that we've been doing with Barry Dunn Consulting on the suite of services that we're providing from police, fire and EMS, parking services, and other downtown services, helping us understand where are our critical gaps, where we responding redundantly, and what steps do we need to take to move forward in that program. And so important areas: cahoots, mobile crisis response, ambulance service, low acuity medical calls, public safe response, and homeless services. So as you see, we began the process in May of 2022. The first phase was the cahoots mobile crisis, which council received a briefing on where we were with that. Then we moved into the ambulance response and low acuity medical calls. And then kind of the rest of the suite of services are where we're seeing impacts throughout the community, from the use of CSOs, the neighborhood service officers, outreach team, park and downtown ambassadors, and other resource officers. Right now, we're in the middle of evaluating the overall system findings, realigning the calls for service, which called upon all of our city departments that are on the front lines providing service to the community to look at the types of calls we're responding to. Are they appropriately categorized? And if not, if one department isn't the primary or shouldn't be the primary, who should be? And so there's been a lot of collaborative effort as we've moved through that process, awaiting a final report. So these next couple slides are really busy, so I apologize as you might focus on it. Take some time when we're done to go back and review, but there's a number of ways where these calls are entering the system. And so this really captures the flow of incoming proactive response to the community needs and services. And the budget really focused on how to highlight those system components, most importantly around mobile crisis response downtown, and then public response services. And so as you see in the way that the requests come in, whether it's from dispatch, directly from public safety crews, the parking maintenance system, or the maintenance management system, which is where we bring information in for our parks and other systems within the city, and then our security maintenance system. From there, a number of protocols and things that are in place for determining who's the right resource to land on that call. And so that's where that call for service realignment work is really targeting. For police, that's the downtown team, which you're going to hear a little bit more in the next presentation about. Our housing support officers, parks resources, fire and EMS, mobile crisis response, and then our public space response that includes park ambassadors, other street issues, and right-of-way problems. And then obviously the resources that show up are really kind of broke up into public safety, police, fire, EMS, and mobile crisis. Then our public space, which is unhoused response, maintenance, and public space cleanup. And so our goal is to make sure that we get people efficiently connected to the services they need, but also have their issues resolved in a timely fashion. This next slide is just for probably a graphical understanding of how complex the system is as we've grown and the community needs have grown, and we try to solve our problems point in time. We've all had a bit of a role in solving the problems facing the community, in particular around unhoused and other community safety needs. And so, again, this is really just to understand how many players have a touch on the community's needs and how interconnected we are, demonstrating the need to utilize a position to help align and coordinate those services. As far as our history goes, when we think about alternative response, City of Eugene's been an early adopter of alternative options through a decades-long partnership with Whitebird and the Cahoots program, established as an alternative to law enforcement or EMS needs for those that are suffering from crisis response or behavioral health emergencies and other addictive behaviors. It's been incredibly successful as we think about the fact that the program, grown here in Eugene in partnership with Whitebird, has become the moniker for federal and state legislation to help fund similar services. So what does the budget enhancement come with? It helps support a $500,000 investment in the biennium for an alternative response planning chief whose responsibility is to manage the calls for service across the 4 city departments charged with public facing service, addressing planning for today, identifying the right resources for the right calls, and then planning for tomorrow. What's the next iteration, and how do we get upstream of some of the community's needs around public space, public safety, and then livability of our community. So the planning for today, this includes recommendations for consolidating access to data streams and the different systems being used by police, fire, the downtown team, and other public space management, identifying and prioritizing critical and high acuity calls and recommendations that are coming from the alternative response study, and then closing gaps in the system through the call for service realignment, like I touched on a little bit earlier, where there's redundant response, there's the wrong type of response for the call, and it's really going to be that coordinating person between the departments, in particular around our public safety net. So right resources for right call, really this is about leveraging data to make sure that the high priority calls get the right resource, assign alternative non-traditional resources to low acuity calls, both from the need and also kind of that fiscal responsible, how many people or how many services need to respond to a problem, and then route unnecessary calls for service away from the emergency response system. And what this isn't about identifying that a community member doesn't need our assistance, but how do we get that out of the emergency response system and get them the care, hopefully in a preventative fashion, before it becomes a more high acuity emergency system. This comes, with our crisis response is a good example. Our consultants at Barry Dunn have let us know that we're overutilizing that service to where they're not available for those critical behavioral health crisis emergencies because they're doing some social service works, and that'll help us manage the contract a little bit better to say this is what they're here for and what resources can we redirect to make sure that this valuable tool is there when our community members need it most in a timely manner. An example, we're working on these strategies in fire around the right resources is recognizing that sending the same thing to every single call is not the right path. And so we've really started to break that out and identify where there's not a patient on scene and how we address those calls, whether or not it's a basic level of service where we can treat and send them on the way or help solve the problem in a different fashion, whether it's a CAHOOTS issue, a basic life support issue, or an advanced life support issue. And this can be replicated throughout the city for the different needs that the community is asking for, whether it's through police response, parks or public spaces response, that we make sure that we're collecting the data, we're getting the right people in the right place at the right time. Planning for tomorrow. This is back to getting upstream of our community's needs and developing plans that are shovel ready. So a good example is as we see legislation from the state of Oregon or federal legislation for cost recovery around behavioral response services that we know what our needs are. We know the best way to target and service those within the community. We're able to leverage those ready to go plans for grant opportunities, for other revenue streams to make sure that our community is getting the best service possible. And this position will really help coordinate that through the data and but again, coordination between those four main public-facing departments. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. There's a lot to unpack as we work to coordinate our alternative response across the city and improve the experience and the livability of Eugene. I'd like to remind everybody as we pass this off to Chief Skinner and the downtown strategies that the plan is to hold questions on all the presentations until they're all done and then open that up to the committee. So I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you. I want to note for the committee, because we have 3 presentations, we are going to hold all questions on any of these topics until our deliberative phase after the break. So just before anyone tries to jump in with anything, I should have said that before they started, but better late than never. Our next presentation is on downtown services from Amanda D'Souza and Chief Skinner.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda D'Souza. I am the Development Programs Manager in Community Development. Today, you're going to hear from Chief Skinner about downtown services, and I wanted to provide some background on this important topic. Downtown Eugene is the social, economic, and cultural heart of our community, but many of the challenges we're seeing across the city tend to be most visible downtown. In addition, the pandemic changed the way people interact downtown. We can no longer rely on office workers to activate our streets. A desire to know how to address these problems led to an effort we called Downtown Priorities and Projects, a public involvement process to identify solutions to address downtown's ongoing and emerging challenges. I'll give you a quick overview of that process. Through this effort, we talked to a number of community members through interviews, focus groups, and an open house. We were able to engage with over 2,000 community members, being sure to talk with residents, employees, businesses, social service providers, and other stakeholders with an interest in downtown. When we asked people to describe the downtown of their dreams, members of our community envisioned a downtown that is safe, clean, vibrant, and walkable. Central to everyone's description were people celebrating, people enjoying arts and culture, people shopping and eating at restaurants with their friends, people going to and from work, and people living downtown. From our work with Projects for Public Spaces in 2016, we know that people attract people, and this rule of thumb rang true during this process. Our community used words like bustling, active, and lots of things to do to describe their hopes for downtown. But we heard that downtown often feels unsafe and dirty. The sidewalks are often dominated by inappropriate behavior that makes members of our community feel threatened. We have a lot of vacancies and blank facades that make downtown feel deserted. And finally, downtown has been dependent historically on office workers and events to activate the streets. Through that outreach process, there were 6 categories of priorities that emerged: housing, public safety, social services, commercial activity and development, public space and mobility, and events and culture. Through those discussions, those top 3 categories, housing, public safety, and social services, quickly rose to the top as being the highest priority. As we focused on these top 3 categories, we heard a need to address 2 big things in downtown: a long-term plan to create new housing and a short-term need to address the experience of being downtown. Council is already in the process of considering supporting the creation of new housing through a possible amendment to the Downtown Urban Renewal Plan. If approved, Council has discussed prioritizing the use of the funds to support new housing. That brings us to the short term and the day-to-day experience of being downtown. To ensure that people getting off the bus, going to the library, or using our public spaces have a positive experience, the city has been exploring shifts in how we've addressed public safety and social services. I'll now hand it off to Chief Skinner to start walking through those changes.
Good evening to everybody at the Budget Committee, Mayor, Council, and Budget Committee members. It's my pleasure to be here with you tonight and talk a little bit about downtown. I'm going to walk through this presentation a little bit, and as always, we're going to be here to answer questions as a result of all the presentations a little bit later. One of the things that's been really important through this budget process, this really difficult budget process, is trying to think creatively around how we make strategic investments. And as we as execs sat in the room and talked about trying to solve this problem around our budget shortfall, it created an opportunity to just get really innovative and creative around where we should either make some cuts or reappropriate some money to do some things differently, especially when it came to our downtown core. But before we talk about some of those new innovations and those new things you're going to see in the next biennium, let's talk a little bit about the historic investments that we've had downtown. You can see here over the fiscal years 21, 22, and 23, these are the investments that we've made in the downtown between program and events and sanitation and beautification. And you can see that we have mostly steadily increased our investments over the course of the last 3 years in an attempt to try and recapture downtown and make it a place that people really, really want to come to and enjoy, just as Amanda was talking about. We've stabilized the public safety team over that period of time, mostly through the mix of the Community Safety Initiative, which is our community safety payroll tax, and the general fund. They split the cost between our downtown public safety team And more recently, what we've done, as you can see in the picture here, is we have deployed our volunteers downtown to be extra eyes and ears and to support that downtown public safety team. We've got just an amazing group of skilled volunteers that are engaging people on every level and on every street corner and trying to give a sense of safety and feeling of welcomeness to those folks that are visiting downtown. In your proposed budget, you'll see some new things that we're really excited about that we think is going to help turn the corner downtown, and this is for this next biennium. You'll see $600,000 in cleaning and improvements downtown. We're going to really try and focus on the cleanliness piece of downtown. We're also going to have programs and events that are going to be funded at $550,000 over the 2-year biennium as we move forward. But one of the real creative things that we're doing is we're talking about a downtown incident commander. This picture is key for me to be able to show to you because oftentimes we think about incident command around something that's negative. We stand up incident command for things that are like wildfires and our pandemic and critical incidents. But don't forget that we had a really, really successful World Championships at Oregon 22. That entire system and that entire event was run through incident command. And we think that the downtown, with the multitude of coexisting competing issues that we have, is best managed and orchestrated through a downtown incident commander using the ICS model that can bring the resources in to really solve the problems that we're seeing downtown. In addition to that, you're going to see $410,000 in this biennium for a brand new program that we're calling our co-responder model program. We've identified that many of the issues that we hear about from our constituents are not necessarily criminal in nature, but they do feel unsafe. And some of them, many of them, are anchored to behavioral health issues or mental health issues that we're seeing from people that are in our downtown core. We're really excited at this point to be entering into a partnership with Lane County, with their forensic intensive treatment team, to bring a person downtown that will be co-located with our public safety team to be able to do co-response to those behavioral health types of calls. Now, this isn't to supplant cahoots. This is a higher level of intensive treatment for those individuals that can allow for Lane County and all of their resources to case manage individuals so that we can find an off-ramp for those folks so that we don't continue to respond to the same people over and over and over again in our downtown core. What that does for us is it allows for us to have a layered response downtown. We certainly have Eugene Police Department, and we handle the criminal nature downtown and the criminal response downtown, and certainly a sense of safety and security that comes with having police officers downtown. The FIT team brings that co-responder model and allows for us to bring that higher level of treatment for people to be able to do that. And lastly, our partners at Cahoots, which will still do mobile crisis response for us when we need that in the downtown core. But as you know, they are stretched so thin across the entirety of the city, and sometimes it's hard to get them to respond in a timely manner anywhere, let alone in the downtown core. So let's talk a little bit about the status and where we're at. So these are the things that we're efforting right now along the left side of your screen here. We have been in collaboration with Lane County for the co-responder model with the forensic intensive treatment team, and we're excited that we're moving along. And to this date, we have a letter of intent from both Lane County and the city of Eugene to collaborate and partner on this project downtown. Really exciting. The incident commander we've started, I've started thinking about who that might best be suited to fill that position. And we're actually in a background phase with an individual that I think is going to be perfect for what we're trying to accomplish downtown. You will see that once we get an agreement signed, that there'll be a behavioral health specialist that will be recruited from Lane County, and we'll leave it up to our partners from Lane County to help us find the best fit for somebody that's going to co-respond and be embedded with our team downtown. The new command structure downtown, which the incident commander will respond directly out of the chief's office. We're hoping to start that July 1st, if not sooner, and we'll start bringing those things together throughout the rest of the summer. And then lastly, to implement the downtown co-responder model, we're hoping by August 1st, we can have that model up and running. As you can see, we're still needing to finish the partnership and recruit for the behavioral health specialist before we can do that. But we are certainly hoping that August 1st that we're going to be able to have a co-responder model downtown. The co-responder model is going to start with the downtown core. Here's what you can see kind of the area that we're talking about to start with. The graphic is to suggest that this is just a small footprint of what we see to be a broader need for co-response throughout the city. But we're starting with the downtown core. We've identified an acute need to have those co-responders downtown. And actually, when the FIT team came and did some walk-alongs with our downtown team, they immediately recognized how much work they could be doing downtown. And I'm pleased to say that even before we have entered into a formal partnership, they've been asking their FIT team members to spend more time downtown to try to address some of our behavioral health issues that we have there. Lastly, I would just say the future. The future is about funding, and it's about being successful on building a sustainable model. I'm really excited that we have applied for a Bureau of Justice Administration grant that we're very hopeful we're going to get. And it's centered and built around this concept of co-response in the downtown core. And we're really hoping if we get that funding, that will be able to bridge a biennium and bring us some funds to be able to take into the future. And so more to come on that. We should know a little bit this fall about whether or not we were awarded that grant. But there are grants out there, and we are aggressively seeking grants to help supplement our budget during this budget shortfall so that we can find sustainability for these amazing programs that we think are going to make a difference in our downtown core. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ty, and I'll look forward to questions a little bit later.
Thank you very much. With that, our third presentation tonight is on unhoused services with Peter Chavan.
Thank you, Ty. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. Good evening, Budget Committee members, Mayor, councilors. I certainly appreciate the opportunity and come to talk with you about what the 23-25 budget has in store for unhoused response. So before, when we talk about unhoused response, I'm having a little trouble here. All right, there we go. When we talk about unhoused response for the city, there's really two streams of activity that's encompassed in that term. So shelter and services run out of the homeless services team. So that would be my folks. And so I'll talk a little bit about budget implications for 23-25 related to shelter and services. There's also a stream related to safe and clean public spaces. And my colleague, Jeff Petrie, will pick up that piece of the presentation. Oh, I'm getting a hint that you folks can't see my screen. Huh. Oh dear. How's that? No? How's that? Okay, great. So before we dive into the budget information, I thought it would be helpful to spend a little bit of time talking about the history of shelter and services within the city. So I think that history begins, I love this phrase, right around the turn of the century in 1998 with the establishment of the overnight parking program. That pretty much carried the city's investment in shelter and services until the wake of the Occupy movement, which some of you may remember happened in 2011. Coming out of that movement, the city partnered with social service providers to develop the first alternative shelter locations. So in 2012, we saw Opportunity Village emerge. 2013, we had the rest stops come onto the scene. And then in 2015, Dusk to Dawn arrived. And what characterized this period of the city's investment in shelter and services were experimental approaches to the growing crisis of homelessness, a number of pilot projects funded with one-time dollars. In 2019, with the passage of the Community Safety Payroll Tax Community Safety Initiative, for the first time, the city had identified a source of ongoing funding for shelter and services. Also in 2019, the city and Lane County partnered on the shelter feasibility study, which some of you may remember as the TAC report, which notably has resulted in the River Avenue Navigation Center, as well as the development of a number of permanent supportive housing units in the ensuing years. With the arrival of COVID in 2020, there was a sudden injection of, pretty substantial federal dollars coming into our community. First, with the CARES Act, which the city used in 2020 to expand the Rest Stop program, and then followed shortly thereafter by ARPA, which has financed our Safe Sleep site development, as well as our support of the Navigation Center. So, diving into the budget, our shelter, or when you think about the budget for shelter and services, there are kind of three buckets that are called out. The first one is shelter. And when you look at our sheltering program, our shelter operations cost about $5.8 million annually, $11.6 million over the biennium. And it's important to remind you all that in FY22 and FY23's adopted budget, the city set aside $11.1 million in one-time funds for Safe Sleep sites, rest stops, and Navigation Center operations. The intention would be we would run those for as long as the money was there. In FY22, our expense to this account was $1.6 million. In FY23 was $4.5 million, leaving just about $5 million of that original allocation for FY24. As we look at the 23-25 biennium for shelter services, we have that $5 million one-time carryover. We also have $1.63 million in ongoing funds, primarily flowing through the community safety payroll tax. Those combined leave us with about a $5 million gap beginning in FY25. To drill down a little bit deeper around what that means, so the city currently supports 696 shelter spaces with direct funding and or the use of city property. The community safety payroll tax finances 262 of those beds. And the programs there are Dusk to Dawn, the overnight parking program, and a small portion of the Rest Stop program. One-time state and federal dollars finance 404 spaces. Those would include our Safe Sleep sites, the Rest Stop expansion, and the River Avenue Navigation Center. So that kind of gives you a picture of where we stand budgetarily for shelter. Moving on to the service component of our budget, this is a little simpler. The 23-25 proposed budget is $1.2 million for the biennium, and that is ongoing funding that's coming through the community safety payroll tax. And so when we think of our services, these programs primarily provide basic needs support to some of our most vulnerable as an initial point of contact. So that provision of basic needs brings this vulnerable population in contact with folks connected to the homeless service system. The idea being they get some of those basic needs met, and through the relationships developed therein are referred to other resources throughout the community, whether that's housing, shelter, food, clothing, case management, health, behavioral health, et cetera. So the service funding is really at that basic needs level, with the idea that connection point leads to referrals to other more substantial support. Moving on to the staffing component of our budget, the 23-25 proposed budget includes 2 additional staff connected to homelessness. The Housing and Homelessness Section Manager, and this really enhances the work of the Housing Implementation Pipeline. You know, the Housing and Homelessness Section Manager helps ensure the strategic work of the Homeless Services team and the Housing Development team evolves in alignment. We know that that's one of the housing and homelessness is one of the biggest challenges in our community. And so having these highly functional teams that have been working, you know, in a somewhat overlapping fashion, have some mechanisms for that work to become increasingly integrated. So that's the Homelessness Section Manager. And then our Homeless Services Analyst is also a connector, but those connections go beyond just housing and homelessness. So for example, the Homeless Services Analyst sits on the public space team that you've heard referenced already. They're doing work with municipal court, working on developing a sheltering program connected to municipal court for folks that they're working with that need shelter. We're in conversations with the chamber around capacity building for social service nonprofits. And this position has also been instrumental in partnering with eWeb to deliver water and electricity to our alternative shelter sites. So these 2 positions help us integrate more tightly within the organization and increase our opportunity to create connections outside of the organization. Looking forward, you know, we're laser focused on our sheltering situation. Some of you may have heard that our community, Lane County, the county is receiving $15.5 million in state funding for shelter, rehousing, and prevention. That process, we're in that process. So the City of Eugene has representatives on the multi-agency coordinating group that's making decisions around the use of that money. We're active on the various task teams that are advising the multi-agency coordinating group. We're in that process. Decisions haven't been finalized, and so we're not clear yet how that money may impact the city's budget, but we are working on it. So bracketing that for a moment, as we look forward, what we do know right now is that we're looking at a $5 million gap for the 23-25 biennium that's going to kick in FY 25. After the biennium, so 25-27, we're looking at a $10.8 million gap. The $5 million gap in FY 25, if we don't solve for that, we're going to lose 332 shelter spaces within the biennium. And then we're anticipating, again, if we don't solve for this gap, an additional 72 spaces in the 25-27 biennium. So that kind of gives you a quick overlay of homeless shelter and services. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Petrie. Jeff.
Thank you, Peter, and hopefully you can work the slide deck for me.
Oh, sure.
Yep. Thank you, Peter. Hello, Mayor, Council, and Budget Committee members. My name is Jeff Petrie, and I am the Curbside and Admin Services Director in the Planning and Development Department. Peter and I work closely here in Planning and Development and presenting our unified presentation tonight. And our approach is to balance our service provision with safe and clean public spaces. Next slide there, Peter. Thank you. Before the pandemic, city services responded to their specific complaint areas individually. So, for example, parking services would respond to an abandoned vehicle complaint, co-compliance would respond to a nuisance complaint on private property, public works may respond to debris complaints in a plainer strip. These complaints could be all around the same location or spread out across the city. We were doing our program service response duties individually and somewhat separately from the other departments. As the pandemic set in and continued, public health guidelines like people be staying in public spaces while the capacity of local shelters was reduced. This resulted in more people in public spaces, and city staff shifted our roles to provide emergency operations support services to our community. This emergency operations model focused and directed our city resources to the highest response needs. As we came out of the emergency operations structure, our community's homelessness crisis continued, and city staff needed to continue our unifying integrated service delivery model, and we transitioned to what is called a unified command structure in the spring of 2021. The unified command structure was led by our two assistant city managers, Christy and Matt, as our unified commanders. This unified command structure allowed the city to continue to strategically deploy and focus resources that spanned across departments and service areas. The unified command structure continued the work that Peter shared earlier about the shelter expansions while addressing residential and business impacts from the homelessness crisis. And working across service areas resulted in creative solutions to our community challenges. Next slide, please. We learned from the unified command structure to more effectively work together across a large organization, but the city needed to return to normal operations for service delivery. So in the summer of 2022, last summer, we transitioned to a new team approach called the Public Space Team. The Public Space Team pulls together teams from across the organization to address community concerns, and the concerns are still very large. In 2023, we have more than 3,600 unsheltered individuals in Eugene alone, and only 1,200 shelter beds countywide. There are a lot of people trying to exist in our public spaces and our community. Next slide, please. So we must be strategic to work together to find solutions. And through the alternative response study, we took an opportunity to take a deep dive into the data to understand the types of requests and what the needs are going forward. Over the last year, we continued to work to make our public spaces clean and safe. And for example, some of the data that we took a deep dive into over the last 10 months, requests for service, over 8,000 requests for service for unsanctioned camping in public spaces. Now, there are many duplicate complaints in this data point, and it requires for every complaint for city staff to go out into the field, assess the situation, remove duplicates, and move forward in the process. Further, the city's right-of-way cleanup team in Public Works has spent over 10,000 hours removing some 3,700 yards of debris from the right-of-way, which is about 730 dump trucks of debris over the last year. Next slide, please. This work has been done since last summer by the Public Space Team, which is shown on this slide. The Public Space Team brings together staff from across city services to best use our resources to assist and address complaints. For example, we have fire and EMS, police, housing support officers, park resource officers, communications, neighborhood service officers, traffic maintenance, stormwater team, and so business outreach, community outreach, street outreach. We have a lot of teams that participate in the Public Space Team. The key investments for the 23-25 budget are highlighted in green on this Public Space Team. It's the incident commander, the homeless services, which Peter discussed previously here, the parking neighborhood service officers, and the right-of-way cleanup team. I also highlighted the housing support officers in the police department. It is not a new budget add for the upcoming budget, but a reprioritization of existing resources. The two housing support officers are integral to the work that's done for the neighborhood service officers, the right-of-way cleanup teams, and other staff working the right-of-way. These are two general fund officer positions that were created about a year ago and are regular positions in the 23 to 25 budget. No main roles help us navigate the challenges of unsanctioned camping, directing people to services, and addressing public safety concerns. Next slide, please. So as we talk about the 23-25 budget and the staffing adds that we have, the main one is, well, not the main one. One of the areas is the public space incident commander, which is imperative for us to be able to reach our goals of a safe and clean public way in our environment. This position will lead the Public Space Team, and similar to the downtown incident commander that Chief Skinner just discussed, will work across the organization or reach into departments and services and direct our work and programs to ensure the city's public spaces are safe and clean. It is also imperative for this position to work with other jurisdictions. It would work with, say, Lane County, State of Oregon, and Railroad to coordinate resource response in our community. Further, it's also going to work with and coordinate with the Alternative Response Planning Chief that we heard earlier from Chief Caven and the Downtown Incident Commander that Chief Skinner just spoke about. Second investment is the Neighborhood Service Officer Program. The Neighborhood Service Officer Program was visioned in the summer of 2020 as we thought about how to redeploy parking officers to support the community's emergency response. They function what you might call as a right-of-way ambassador and to assist in the unhoused crisis. They are non-sworn staff that can take lead instead of law enforcement. The creation of the NSO program aligned with the city's newly created unified command structure to manage right-of-way across the city. And we have worked with our union AFSCME to create a temporary job classification called the NSO with 2 positions that has expanded to 4 positions in this fiscal year. The NSOs provide a first contact for enforcing city parking code and more efficiently address unsanctioned camping and street storage violations on public property. They're also linked to the Eugene Police Department for assistance when needed. The biennium includes 4 regular positions and 4 limited duration positions because we're just not sure what the need is going to look like over the next 2 years. The third major investment, which is the Public Works Maintenance Right-of-Way Cleanup Team. It includes a dedicated team that consists of 4 positions that are resourced for hazardous waste cleanup, the dump trucks that we talked about earlier, contracts, temporary staff, and other costs. Currently in Public Works, there are multiple programs doing this and not a dedicated team for right-of-way cleanup. So this new team, which is funded through stormwater funds, wastewater funds, and road funds, will be a dedicated team to work in the right-of-way to allow other public works units to focus on non-camping related cleanup and public space maintenance. And I think that's the end of my slides, Peter. And so I'll hand this back over to you, Ty. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all 3 of those excellent presentations. I just wanted to ask, are we going to be able to get those PowerPoints sent out to the committee? Seeing a head nod, excellent. I think we'll all appreciate being able to go back through that in more detail. And with that, the next piece on our agenda, having done the presentations, is our budget committee discussion. And I think we have a break scheduled. We were going to take it at 7:30, but I think taking it now makes sense before we dive into deliberations and discussion. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break now. Give everyone a chance to stretch a little before we dive into all of our thoughts on all of this. I'll see everyone back at 7:08. Thank you. into our discussion round, I am going to toss over to the city manager to share something with us.
A toss over. It sounds so gentle. Thank you, Ty. I know there's probably going to be, I know there's a lot of discussion to be had and probably a lot of questions about those presentations. So I wasn't exactly sure where to weigh in, and just remind everybody here, I'd say a couple of things based on the last couple of public forums at the council and tonight, and things I'm hearing on email. Just to remind everybody, I don't think that I've worked for the city for 27 years. I don't think we've been in a more difficult place than we are right now. It's not just the amount of the reductions, it's that, you know, we have the amount of the reductions here that still anticipate an additional $8 million to be found still in this biennium that we haven't identified. So if it's not revenue, we're looking at another $8 million potentially of service shifts. And with the pressure and what we're hearing so loud and clear from the community around, we have to see a bigger impact. And so the way we approached the budget was really to think about, how do we make the $15 million of reduction? And that's going to have to happen no matter what. And if we want to have a bigger impact and try to really reset ourselves in a way that we can be more efficient, make a bigger change, and really start to transform, what could we repurpose to do that? And that's kind of where we landed. And none of us, I can't say there's nobody on this executive team that feels good about any of the reductions. We know these are all things that we love, that you love, and we went, you know, tried a lot of different mixes and matches to get to this place, which is our sort of collective wisdom, and ultimately my decision around what I thought best represented a path forward that sustained all of our services at a level that helps us kind of start moving towards the future. It's very integrated, all holds together, like I said, with the Gabion basket. I also completely understand, and you know, there's not a person that speaks that I don't also feel like, yeah, we talked about that. So I know you're in a difficult position. We're here to support you through this and help navigate that. And I know you're feeling the same amount of pressure that I did. So I just wanted to say a couple of those things, that people know that we're not going into this by the city has decided to make cuts. We really, without reserves, don't have an option to do anything about this. Thanks.
Thank you. The way I'm going to structure this, we're going to start, since I know we had 3 substantive presentations, we're going to start with a full round robin that's open to any budget thoughts you have. But if you do have questions, please try to prioritize those in this first round. I will also be making sure we get at least second rounds for anyone who needs them. So if you have more than 3 minutes of total contributions, questions, and then also broader budget thoughts, try to save the broader budget thoughts for round 2 and keep questions in round 1 so that we can, because your questions may be shared. So with that, I'm going to take us into the round robin, starting with Councillor Semple, to be followed by Councillor Zelenka.
Hi, I don't have any questions right now, so thank you, and on to the next.
Thank you, Councillor Zelenka, followed by Ryan Kanofsky.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ryan, followed by Zach Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question, I'm curious, with so much engagement in downtown, I'd like to know a little bit more about what we're doing to help engage businesses as well, and see kind of, you know, how we're just bringing them into this conversation, try to bring folks back, bring more vibrance. You know, how are we associating with the downtown businesses in this plan?
Sorry, Ryan, I was looking to see if either Amanda or Chief Skinner were going to jump in here and talk about the downtown businesses piece. I think Amanda's probably best suited, but maybe
Yeah, I'll tee Amanda up this time since she teed me up last time. So thank you for the question. What I would say is, at least within the strategies that I talked about, one of the things that the incident commander in the downtown core is going to also do is work really collaboratively with our downtown manager, Eric Brown, and with PDD as well. So it'll be about the relationships that individual builds across the department, as well as across the downtown core with its business owners, to include constituents at the library, LTD, Chamber of Commerce, all of those things. So this incident command position isn't just around necessarily safety. There'll be some engagement there, but I'll leave Amanda to be able to talk to kind of the depth of the economic development that we're working on downtown.
Thanks, Jay Skinner. You stole my thunder. I think we have Eric Brown, our downtown manager, who's spent 3-4 years building relationships with the business community. So he's very well in tune with the business owners downtown. We talked with them a lot through that downtown priorities effort. We continue to talk about them. They're the ones that are experiencing the most day-to-day of the issues. And so we're working with them to understand what their needs are. Has been a priority. We regularly meet with Downtown Eugene Incorporated, Downtown Eugene Merchants. And I mean, those are the people that are investing their time and money in the downtown. And so we want to be able to support them as best as we can. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And my next question is probably for one or both of you as well. And to the city manager's point about, tight funding, I'm curious about how much of the improvement dollars are going to be one-time funding, thinking about that's probably not something we can continue to do forever, but might help, in future budgets as well, as we can do one time, I
think the end of your question got cut off. So I think, are you asking about like the downtown urban renewal dollars or the?
Yeah, like the improvement dollars, things like that, beautification stuff.
Yeah, so at least in terms of the downtown urban renewal plan amendment, the proposed amendment that's out there right now, the funds that are that would be in that are the majority of, as council has indicated, they intend to spend to support housing, but we would also be using funds to support a lot of those physical improvements to street, curbs, sidewalks, a lot of those pieces that add a sense of place. We would want to do a lot of alley lighting, which directly affects the public safety elements and the people's perception of safety. So that if the amendment is approved, those funds would be available. Based on the amendment they're looking at, that district would be extended for 19 years. So there's quite a long time and a good amount of funds included in that to make a lot of those improvements.
Thank you. And then on to the homeless services. I was curious, so I guess 2 questions on this. So I was curious about the folks we're partnering with, because I think that with tight budgets, we can go a lot longer with, starting to do braided funding and public-private partnerships and investing into our fantastic nonprofits. So curious, how much of that are we looking to, or maybe looking to do even more to make our dollars go as far as possible? And then I was also curious about the loss of space, or loss of, loss of space is what I wrote down. That's exactly what you said, but what does that mean when we say loss of spaces? Because a lot of those are permanent shelter. They're built. They got 4 walls and whatnot. So I'm curious about what that means when we lose them. Are we just not able to staff those capacities, things like that?
Yeah, I'll take. Thanks for the question. I'll take the second one first. Yeah. So the loss of space means that we don't have operational dollars to contract with social service providers to run those sites. And then in terms of ongoing funding, we've mentioned the capacity building work that we've begun with the chamber. That's one piece. We do have private sector dollars supporting some of our alternative shelters, but nowhere near the level of support that they need.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think besides many thanks and appreciations, that's all I have for questions right now.
Thank you. Zach Mulholland, to be followed by Ryan Moore.
Great. Thank you for the wonderful presentations, and also to everybody that spoke during public comment or wrote emails. I share many of your concerns. I think sort of 2 overarching questions. The first is regarding the revenue shortfall of $8 million a year which it looks like 5 million of that is for shelter space. Have you thought much about where those funds might come from, or what the process would be to determine where those funds would come from? Is that a separate and distinct process from council's other discussions of revenue for priorities, or would it be a subset of that conversation?
Sorry, I guess I don't need to raise my hand. That 8 million doesn't actually cover the 5 million. That is like a shortfall beyond the shortfall. So our plan was and continues to be to go to council to talk about help determine the scope of what a revenue team might talk about and the areas of service that a revenue team might talk about. And then the rest, some of it will be, as I talked about, revenue with small r, we're implementing some of those this year. Could be some additional efficiencies or cuts. We're just going to have to sort of monitor it as we go because those numbers are changing. And what our plan was kind of land this budget, start those revenue conversations. Some of them overlap, but it's not exactly the same. If we get $5 million for the unhoused shelter, it won't solve that problem.
Okay, thank you. Good to know that this 5 million shortfall is in addition to the other $8 million shortfall, and that it sounds like we don't have a good idea yet where we might be able to find those revenues. My other question, with regards to homelessness services, it's in conversations that I've had with unhoused individuals, there's a lot of mental health issues, a lot of trauma. It seems like we need people with like mental health professionals and addiction treatment specialists that can go out and proactively work with homeless individuals to connect them with services and get them into temporary housing, et cetera. Can you speak to, what are we doing proactively as opposed to like reactively, for which staff is the primary responsibility helping connect people with services rather than that being a secondary responsibility to them enforcing some other action?
I'll take a first stab at that from the homeless services perspective. And so as the city has ramped up its investment in what we're calling homelessness services, and you can tell from the budget presentation that the bulk of that work is around shelter. And as we've deployed these shelters over the last several years, the city has been paying for what we call operational expenses. So maintaining the environment within the shelter, helping people get in, trying to make sure that they're available to service providers who do the mental health, case management, housing navigation. And so in our community, Lane County is the primary jurisdiction for service provision. We've kind of stepped into homelessness to provide spaces within which people can receive services. So from the homeless services perspective, that's kind of how the city's investment plays out.
But in general, if we're interacting, if the city is interacting with a homeless individual in a park, downtown, et cetera, is that first point of contact someone that's trying to connect them with services, or they're trying to enforce some rule or provision and giving help to access resources as sort of a secondary part of their position?
I think, so my experience with folks working on, say, the public spaces team, for example, they are, it's heartbreaking what they encounter on a daily basis as they're trying to maintain public spaces. So within their job description, their priority has something to do with maintaining public spaces. That there's an individual who's unhoused and in dire straits is in that public space, they for sure are trying to help them. And all of these teams have a list of resources that are present in our community, whether those resources have the capacity to take the person they're talking to right then is another matter. But I will say that the public space team members are very interested in connecting people to services. They're just not a ton of services available. But I don't want to, you know, Jeff, if you have something to add to that, you know, feel free.
Peter said it great. It's situational awareness in the field. It's our trauma training. It's working with each person that we encounter. So it is, as Peter said, we want to connect and finding those services, and it is hard work.
Great, thank you. I'd be interested in exploring the possibility of funding some individuals whose first responsibility is to help connect people with services rather than as sort of a secondary responsibility to their other roles. You know, as we're looking at increasing enforcement for camping and parking and other things, I would like us to first prioritize connecting people with services before enforcement to the extent feasible. You brought up during the PowerPoint services, we're spending roughly $1.225 million per year, connecting 3,000 individuals with basic needs support. Can you describe what do those basic needs supports look like? And then those 3,000 individuals, how does that compare to the total houseless population? And what overlap is there? Are those mostly unhoused folks, or are those folks that are in some type of supportive housing or other shelter?
Those are primarily unhoused, unsheltered folk. I would have to do a little I know that there are at least 2,700 of those are unique individuals. And then the kinds of supports that they're receiving are food, clothing, showers, school supplies. I'm trying to think of, I think those are the main ones. And I think there was another question you had in there that I didn't. Oh, how's that compare to the overall population? So 4,600 unhoused people in Lane County, 3,600 in Eugene. So a significant proportion of those folks are getting services either through the Lindholm Service Center, 15th Night, or our day access resources, mostly happening out of the provider room at Community Court.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Moore, followed by myself.
I can figure out how to unmute. Thank you. I really appreciate the efficiency that we have created in delivery of homeless services, right? Used to be, there were different line items from different departments, and it seems it's more linked now and cohesive, which is great, and I'm sure saves public dollars. I think we're moving that way on housing and renter services, which is also great and badly needed, instead of staff from different areas doing similar things, linking it up and making efficiencies. A question, since it sounds like this is the language we're using, what happened to those 730 dump trucks of debris from the camps?
Good question. I assume they go to the landfill or various, some of this hazardous material, and there's different ways to abate that. So I think, at the end of the day, it's in the landfill.
Okay, I get that a lot of that material is not salvageable and honestly is trash. Some of it are things like birth certificates and IDs. And I believe there is state law requiring storage for a period of time. Does that sound correct?
That is correct. So we do differentiate the personal items from the debris.
Okay, so that's not included.
It's a 40, we hold them out at Public Works, and yes, so.
Awesome, okay.
Yeah.
And so sorry, just to continue the analogy, I know it's too blunt maybe, but the 730 dump trucks, is the funding for that process included in the right-of-way cleanup team, the $1.8 million?
Yes, that would be the materials and services.
So it's not just, sorry, I cut you off. It's not just personnel costs that are included in that.
Yeah, that's the total budget.
Okay, cool. All right, that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Yeah. I don't know if we actually have a bunch of dump trucks, but it's the metric and visualization we're working
on. Metaphor, yeah.
Thank you. I'll be followed by Councillor Ye. I don't know if I have too much to say at this moment. I don't think I have any particular questions on the presentations. I do want to thank everyone who came for public comment. I'm always happy to hear perspectives from the community. It's very useful in guiding our process here. I definitely have significant concerns about impacts to our library system, to our animal services, and to our fire system as well. So the concerns are really, really reasonable to me. I don't know how much we're going to be able to do about it yet. That's still going to take some more digging and some more conversation. But I'm definitely very interested in trying to find some ways to mitigate, particularly with the library and the animal services pieces, the areas where it's feeling like there are some significant public-facing results of these cuts, which as much as possible, obviously, when you're cutting 15 million, there will be some public-facing impacts, but as much as possible, I'm hoping there's room to find some ways to maybe minimize that a little bit. I'm looking forward to some more conversations on those topics. But in the meantime, I'm going to offer time to Councillor Ye, followed by Eliza Kaczynski.
Thank you, Chair. I do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Eliza, followed by Raina Jackson.
Thank you, and thank you to staff and everyone who came out to answer the questions and give the presentations, and to the staff who answered many of our questions via email over the past couple of days. And so I very much appreciate that. I want to make sure, and I feel like this kind of got touched on a little bit already, but I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. And so I'm going to put it in kind of the context of what we might expect from a supplemental budget a year from now. If I'm looking at this 8.2 million and this 5 million that got mentioned in the presentation, if we find a pot of gold that has $100 million in it, which let's think optimistically, this has been a very down budget season, so we'll think about some pots of gold maybe. What we would see is a supplemental budget that would add back into the budget $5 million worth of 332 shelter beds continuing, which is not in that budget now. Like those would go away if barring a pot of gold. Is that correct?
Yes, it would take future supplemental budget action to add back those pieces that aren't in, including any of the $5 million for the unhoused work would need to come back to future supplemental.
And then the 8.2 million is things that when we are doing our pot of gold supplemental budget, we wouldn't see because those are in the budget now. And so
no, we would still need budget authority on a future supplemental budget. In the current budget, we have a revenue placeholder in the second year of the biennium that equals that $8.2 million. So in order to actually add the budget appropriation for additional services to support changes, if there are changes, we would need to. So if we have a revenue, yes. If there are changes to the service system, we would need budget authority to enact those changes. If it's just recognizing the revenue, either way, we would either need to recognize the new revenue, or if there were changes on the expenditure side in conjunction with that, we would also need to recognize recognize those on a future supplemental budget. Does that make sense?
Maybe. So
right
we
now,
need to say like
a revenue placeholder.
Right. Okay. And so the revenue placeholder, we wouldn't need to say like this is specifically what that revenue is going for. That revenue is already kind of in, those expenses are in the budgets.
It would correct. So if we identify revenue, there may be some changes depending on what the revenue is generated for. So Sarah mentioned the scope of the revenue team will be determined, which may be a different number, right, than the $8.2 million revenue placeholder that's in the forecast now in the second biennium. So depending on the outcomes from the revenue committee and how that, if that revenue is implemented at council, and then also if there are changes. So there could potentially be other service changes that would come back as a package, depending on all of the pieces that are put in place through those conversations.
Okay, so if this pot of gold was specifically for a thing, then that would help, that would determine like what ends up happening.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm gonna be following all the rainbows I can find till the end over the next year. And if there was any desire to kind of look at some of these places where some of the things we're having to do are very painful, I think to everybody in the community, that would be in addition to all of this that we're talking about as far as existing gaps and placeholders and things. Is that correct?
Yes, any other changes to the current proposal would be either additional revenues or an alternate service prioritization in another area.
Okay. And again, I just want to second and repeat my thanks to staff and to everybody who's been working on this so far. We've been getting a lot of emails over the past few weeks, and it's very, very difficult, and you all have been having to sit with this for months and to some degree years. And again, I just want to show my appreciation for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Raina Jackson, followed by Councillor Clark.
It's a lot of information to process, so I will formulate my questions and send them via email. One in particular, I just wanted to ask just more about with the library reductions, the impact, right? What are the exact services that we'd be looking at? Just digging a little deeper there in terms of what we would be dealing with some of those reductions. And again, I'll send the rest via email, but a lot of information in process, but good to understand exactly where we are and where we need to be at the end of the process.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all those who presented tonight and for the hard work they're doing behind all of it. I appreciate it very much. First, I want to say that I will have a motion later in this process when we get to the appropriate place to address the shortages in fire. I think that our decision with CSI to add a squad was a good one, but we need to back it out in the same fashion. It's my idea that we don't need to keep the squad and lose the station. We need to do the other way around. We tried to enhance services by adding the squad. We need to now delete the squad and keep the station. I know there are multiple ordinances that need to be addressed. Do that, and I will have those motions at the right time. To my friend Eliza, I would say start looking for the first rainbow with the city's policy response to homelessness. To the city manager, I would ask, can you please give me through, Twyla or whomever, our city's expenditure on homeless services over time, starting in like 2012 to today, how much do we spend each year on homeless services? From my point of view, that's the elephant in the room. We spend millions and millions and millions a year now in a policy that is failed because the problem continues to get worse. And we need a new approach. We are doing this in place of, as Peter said, the appropriate folks who should be addressing this, and that's the county. I don't believe we're putting enough pressure on the county to put enough pressure on the state to do the things that are required for a public health response. That is the responsibility of the county, and I think we need to do more. When we're with one-time funds and with other things, we've spent an increasing number of millions of dollars a year to the point where we're now choosing between Green Hill and how we respond to the homeless problem, and fire stations and and our core missions, and dealing with this problem effectively, which is the most important to the community. I think we need a new approach to how we're dealing with this. I don't think an ever expanding number of shelters is going to do the job. I would say we're now, for the second time, going down, in my opinion, kind of a rabbit hole, and I'm running out of time, so I may need a second, of asking people what they'd like to see in downtown. We're getting the response of clean. I think that word, if it hasn't been explored in that polling, needs to be, what do people mean by clean? I get dozens and dozens and dozens of photographs from downtown business owners every week, from arriving at their door and finding mounds of human waste in their doorway. That's overnight, not during the day, the time when we need the greatest law enforcement response, in my opinion. I'm out of time. I'll try for a second round to finish this.
Really quickly, Chair, I will just say that I had that same question about how we've invested those monies over time. I don't have it right in front of me, but we actually have built the shell and actually populated a pretty good spreadsheet that shows that from, I think, even before 2012. So a little bit more work on that, and we can provide that for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Keating, followed by Siobhan Cancel.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to dive right in because I've got about 8 or 9 questions, and starting with the CSI. It's my understanding that approximately 100 unhoused animals cycle through Green Hill annually. This question is for Peter, and I've got questions for Peter and for Chief Skinner and for Catherine and Manager Maderi. But first, I'll start with Peter, unless anyone else wants to take it. Do we appropriate any of the $1.2 million from the CSI that are meant to serve our most vulnerable population by helping serve those with unsheltered animals by funding a portion of Green Hill's operations with a portion of that $1.2 million?
Councilor Keating, no, we don't finance that service through the Community Safety Initiative. We do, however, build that into the operational budget for the shelters that we do operate. And so folks who are accessing our shelters can receive vouchers to go have their animals attended to.
Okay.
That route.
Okay, sticking with Green Hill and sticking with Peter, what is the county's funding role with Green Hill? Were animal services once housed under the Human Services Division? Can and should Human Service Commission members advocate for a return of county-funded animal services under the Human Services Division or HSC?
I don't have the answer for you on that, Councilor Keating, but I for sure will explore.
Thank you. The CSI ordinance number 20616 passed in 2019 indicates, quote, funding need is for the following package: police services, including 40 patrol officers, 5 detectives, 4 sergeants, 10 community safety officers, 9.5 staff for 911, animal services, and traffic safety officers, and evidence control and forensic analysts. This question is for Chief Skinner. Since CSI collection and implementation, how have the dollars dedicated to that 9.5 staff described, the 911 operators, animal services, and forensic analysts been allocated?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councilor Keating. Staff is listening to this question, and we're going to be able to pull together the exact breakdown between general fund and CSI hiring. And so I'll be able to get back to you with the CSI implementation or how far we are down with the CSI implementation. The one thing that I would say in response to that is that was a plan, our best plan that's almost 4 years old now. And what we're realizing that the cost of labor and the cost of many of these positions is much more expensive than we can afford within the CSI. So we've had to make some decisions across the board on what not to do to be able to stay within our budget parameters. And so every part of the CSI has been touched by that as a result of cost of labor and some unanticipated costs around fleet and other types of things like that. But I can get back to you on that.
I appreciate it. How locked in, this is for Catherine, is council in funding pieces that are mentioned in ordinance in regards to the CSI?
The portion that you just read from is actually a finding to the ordinance. It's not binding, or the council's not bound by that at all. All of the findings of those ordinances were really providing explanation and background to explain how the number was built and what some of the assumptions, and because you needed to have a number for the amount of the payroll tax. And so there needed to be a plan and it needed to be built on something. So that's really what that is this is what the plan was based on. It's not binding. That paragraph and all of the other finding paragraphs aren't binding as part of the adoption of the ordinance.
Thank you. Super helpful. Okay, back to Chief Skinner. You alluded to the Bridge Biennium co-responder model grant. Could you explain that, and how likely is it that EPD is going to receive this, and is it additive, or could you clarify if it's potentially supplementing a cost that can cover a gap elsewhere?
Yeah, Council, I like my chances. I've got a really bright grant writer within the Chief's office that has done a fantastic job of submitting a really, really strong and competitive proposal. It is our hope that it is additive downstream, that our existing co-responder model will be refunded in the next biennium, and that this grant funding will be additive. Generally speaking, grants are not successful if you're already finding a way to spend money on a solution and then you supplant that with grant funding. But they are really competitive if the city shows an initial investment like we are now, and that it becomes additive. So that's really my hope, is that this would actually expand services downtown around behavioral health.
Thank you. Speaking of downtown, you mentioned, Chief, $550,000 for, quote, program and events. Is that the same as fun downtown activities that were alluded to at our last budget meeting? And if so, do you know if these are revenue generating activities? What are some examples of these activities? Do we seek sponsors for these activities? If not, why not?
And I'm going to shift, and I don't know if Ben can answer that for us around specifically programming.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Chief Skinner, and thanks, Councilor, for the question. Those are, in fact, the same events, and some examples of what those events are include National Dance Week, which is in conjunction with a ton of partners, Halloween Downtown, which we do with the Downtown Merchants, Fiesta Cultural, which we do with the Lane Arts Council and a variety of community partners, and the Artistic Encounters concert series, which happens in Kesey Square during lunch. This also actually includes the downtown events and permitting coordinator, which assists all of those outside groups who want to program or perform or have events in the downtown activity zone, and covers the downtown activity zone permitting process. So, and they are not revenue generating events. The events are intended and designed to be free and open to the broader public, with the intention of activating the downtown core with some positive activity with low barriers for participation. That said, we do have a lot of partnerships and some in-kind sponsors and support that assist in cost recovery, but none at this point that would generate a net revenue off of those. But we are definitely looking into additional sponsorship opportunities around that.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll reserve my editorial comments about some of those pieces and send follow-up questions via email. Thank you.
Thank you. Siobhan.
Thank you so much for all three of those presentations. I have a lot of questions as well. Thanks for letting me go last because quite a few of them were answered too. One that I think I will kind of bring to the group, and I don't know if it's something that can be answered right now, is I'm really curious about how these like the alternative response downtown Eugene and EPD are going to be working together. I've mentioned before that sometimes an increased police presence doesn't necessarily increase safety. And as we look to approach populations that may be unhoused or maybe communities of color, I would just love to know more about how we're going to approach in a way that is not dangerous or detrimental. And then I can actually send my list of questions in for the rest, but I just wanted to make sure that that was highlighted. Oh, wait, I have one more. So one that I was curious about that is specific to EPD, when we're talking about our downtown business services, are there any specific duties that will be assigned to the presence in downtown that may not apply to the rest of the city as a whole?
I want to better understand your question. So and what services are you specifically talking about that are downtown when you think about the rest of the city?
Okay, so like the yellow jackets or what used to be my day, the red hats. I'm just curious if that's something that would be more intensified downtown than in the rest of the areas.
So the Red Hats are actually a private entity that is funded through DEI downtown. They are separate from any city function. So the Yellow Jackets, as we call them, our volunteers downtown, are actually an extension of some things we're already doing around the rest of the city, which is called Seniors on Patrol, which during the nice months of the year, they're doing some of this same work along our bike paths as well, where they're walking and engaging people and reporting suspicious behavior and dangerous behavior so that we can respond more efficiently to those things. And so the volunteers that we're using downtown, they're just a small group of 75 individuals that are doing volunteer work throughout the entire city. And some of it is very similar to what they're doing downtown.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That of course brings up another question. What sort of training, if any, is given to the volunteers or other people that like would call in suspicious activity or something like that?
There's a baseline of training for all of our volunteers, as you can imagine, regardless of what their function is. But those individuals that are engaged in things like graffiti cleanup, which is our Huckleberry Patrol, Seniors on Patrol, our downtown Yellow Jackets, who may have an opportunity to engage with different members of our community, we train them in areas of de-escalation. Everybody gets bias-related training to understand how they show up and how they affect members of our community, especially our underrepresented members of our community. And then there's some technical training that happens because, as you saw in the picture, they carry police radios so that they have the ability to communicate in case they get into trouble or they see something that's troubling. They do that. So there's some technical training to make sure that they're acting and responding appropriately as well. So our volunteer coordinator, Lindy Smith, could provide kind of an overarching curriculum that all our volunteers go through if you would like to see that. But those are some things right off the top of my head.
Okay, that's good to know. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I currently see requests for a second round from Eliza and Councillor Clark, and I'm seeing more hands start to go up, which was the ask. But before we dive into round two, I want to invite Mayor Vinnis to share any thoughts she might have with us.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate everyone else's questions. I just wonder if, because we heard some testimony concerned about reduction of fire truck, if Chief Caven would come back on and sort of connect the dots for folks about what the plan is that Mike, Councillor Clark alluded to this. I'm not sure it's entirely clear to everyone, the allusion that he was making, and might be helpful just to explain what the thinking is in the fire department about that truck and the squad.
Okay, I can touch on that briefly. There's a kind of deeper presentation about the whole picture and kind of where we've been, where we're going, and some of those challenges for next Wednesday's meeting. But the basic premise is we'll reduce a fire company in a station in West Eugene. We're still working through the data to make sure that our decisions fit the needs of the community as a whole best. But effectively, an engine would shut down. It would be replaced with a crew of 2 people on a smaller pickup truck type vehicle. We call them a brush truck. Has a little bit of water, small pump, is capable of responding to some of the gaps in EMS calls. But what Councillor Clark was alluding to around the CSI was the establishment of a community response unit, which is similar to the squad, but doesn't have firefighting capability. So that was going to be an enhancement to the system in the core kind of high demand, low acuity call areas. And so what we did in this was leverage the funding for that unit, which was kind of a peak hour, 7-day a week, but not 24-hour rig. Put some investment back into making sure it was staffed with fire crews and for 24 hours a day in that slot. That's the basic premise. Next Wednesday, there'll be a presentation with a whole lot more detail to hopefully clear up kind of questions, and then just going to show where kind of long-term gaps for investments might need to be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. For the second round, as always, I'm going to take the 4 people whose hands are up in the same order as we went in the first round, which is actually the reverse, ironically, of the order the hands were raised. So if we want to start with Ryan Konofsky, followed by Zach Mulholland.
Perfect. Thank you. I just had one quick question. I missed it on this, and this is totally okay if this is information yet, but given when you did your report that was clear as mud about our whole fund, structure, and I really do appreciate that thing. It was really eye-opening to see how complex our system is. And I think one question I continue is the numbers and the need and matching staffing with the need and the calls and things like that. And I totally appreciate if that information is coming. It's probably takes a long time to study, but if that is available, I think that's a question I would have is making sure we match the numbers from getting kitties out of trees to the more major crimes, things like that, along the pendulum of the very complex system we have.
Yeah, and I think all the engaged departments in the alternative response study had data available that we're working at coordinating through how that report comes out. But what we should see is moving into the future, in particular with the planning chief position, is an ability to report out and communicate on that far more effectively. We've all got some really talented data analysts. It's about learning how to pull those systems together to work more effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zach, to be followed by Eliza Kaczynski.
Great, thank you. Just a couple more questions on unhoused shelter and then a couple on fire response. With regards to our shelter beds and spaces, do we know what the average length of stay is of folks that stay at those sites? And then how successful are we at moving folks into more permanent housing, self-supported housing out of those sites? What we're doing in that regard? I think you're muted.
We do have some data from FY22. We're still gathering data from our current fiscal year. It's a little misleading because when you look at the total number of beds, not all of those beds were online in the beginning of FY22. So I can tell you that in FY22, We're actually, I'm looking at across our shelter system. I would say probably in the neighborhood of 20% are moving on what we call positive exits. And so that might be housing, permanent supportive housing, non-supported housing, moving back in with parents, friends, other relatives. In other words, they're exiting, but not exiting to the street. So about 20%. I'll remind you that the key variables that we see in our homeless service system that get people into housing, there are three. Housing navigation services, a place that people can be found. They have navigation services, a rental subsidy. The programs that are successful at moving people into housing from shelter or from the street have housing subsidies attached to them. So, and then housing on the other end. So we have a shortage of housing, housing subsidies, and staff that are the key movers of people from unsheltered or even sheltered homelessness into housing. And these sites in particular don't have rental subsidies attached to them and have had sporadic housing navigation services over their lifespan. And so again, we're working with our partners at the county to try and enhance access to those key resources within our shelters. They just don't have them at this point in time.
Okay, and then can you respond to do you know the average length of stay that someone stays at the shelters before leaving? And then can you define that 20% positive exits? Is that of the people that leave, 20% exit positively? And so where are the other 80% going? Or we just don't know?
So the where they're exiting to are back to the street, are deceased, don't know. I mean, there are a variety of things. And so, you know, I can put together a little table that has length of stay I don't have at my fingertips, but length of stay, positive exits, and was there other data you were looking for?
Just what programs we have to help people achieve those positive outcomes, those positive exits.
So again, I'll remind you that where the city has stepped into this is to set up places where people can live safely. And then we work with our partners at the county that deliver services into these places. And so if you're asked, I guess I'd just like clarification. Are you asking what the city does? What services does the city provide? Or within our community, what are the kinds of services that help move people?
I mean, it would be nice if we knew what the city and the county were doing to help people successfully transition out of these sites. And, you know, how many people are entering the sites, and then how long is it taking them while they're there? And then how many are leaving successfully to a better outcome when they transition out of that site?
Sure.
Okay, and then I'm going to jump over to the fire piece. I guess one question is just around with alternative response. Like, are we generally over responding to many of these calls with, you know, a greater, you know, a fire engine when we need an EMS? Like, how often are we sending a fire engine when lower level of service would be sufficient?
So there's a couple different ways to answer your question. As you know, the alternative response study looks at the city as a whole and all the different services we're responding to, where maybe we're redundant with police and fire, police in cahoots, fire in cahoots, some of those things. It also is informing on some of the work we're doing to redesign the types of ambulances we're deploying and the type of workforce we're able to access. And then we're already working on a review of what types of calls require a larger response and not. But what's important to understand, we go back to 2017 and an investment made by the city council to add ambulance capacity. A big part of why fire trucks show up to these calls is our ambulances are at the hospital, stuck at the hospital on the wall, trying to offload their patients sometimes. And so whereas we might be able to reduce the redundancy of response, or what we would call over resourcing a call, we won't always be able to get rid of it again, because there's other influences in that system that are impacting it. But this work will help us drill down, identify, be able to clearly communicate how we're resourcing which calls, and then which calls we can pull out of the 911 system and use a different resource similar to the CRU from the CSI, or the nurse triage line, that if funding becomes available, we're able to redirect calls in that fashion. And so this planning, yes, it will have a big impact on your question around how we're deploying in fire, but it doesn't, or it does have a bigger impact across all city systems to eliminate those redundant responses.
Thank you. And then with regards to the proposed changes from the station to the fast response unit, any thoughts on how that's going to affect response times or level of service to the affected areas?
So for the lower acuity, more common EMS calls, the goal with how that was designed was that we wouldn't see a dramatic change in response times. When we talk about fire, structure fires, those types of needs, that there is a ripple effect across the system, because we have to pull a fire engine from another station further away to help fill out the minimum number of firefighters required to arrive on the scene. And so for us, we don't staff with 4 firefighters on a rig, meaning that we need a second engine showing up just to go to work. And so there's a ripple effect in our capabilities around structure fire response in those high risk emergencies.
Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. Eliza, followed by Raina Jackson.
I wanted to express my appreciation for Councillor Clark for signaling in advance motions that he was thinking of. We don't actually have any new members this year, I don't think, except for perhaps Commissioner or Councillor oh, and Zach. Yes, we do have new members this year. I'm sorry, Zach. But I do very much appreciate it when those motions are signaled in advance, just because it gives some time to think about it and to really kind of understand what's going on before we're trying to vote and deliberate on the last night. And I think this year in particular, if people are able to signal where they're seeing that money coming from as part of that motion, because I do think that unlike previous years where we could draw from reserves or draw from other funding sources, this year, my impression is doing one thing means not doing another. And so that I feel like is going to be part of the calculus for me, is not just whether the thing that we're doing is a thing we want to continue, but also what is the trade-off there. And I think that's important for people in the community as well. We tend to hear from people more when they are unhappy. We aren't hearing people coming and saying, thank you for not making reductions to the thing I care the most about. And so I think if that's going to shift, that should be something that people have the opportunity to weigh in on. And I do feel like Councillor Clark did signal a little bit where he was thinking of things coming from. So I appreciate that as well. And that was just my thoughts on that, to try and help ensure that I'm able to participate well in discussions that will be happening over the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Raina, followed by Councillor Clark.
I had it and then I took it down, so I'm passing. Thank you.
So Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Keating then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say that I'm looking forward to Chief Caven's presentation next week. He's a very, very smart man, and he knows what the department needs, and he's very capable. And I hesitate to say he's probably smarter than I am, but he certainly knows this business more than I do. So maybe there's a better way than my suggested motion. But I say this, that I also hear from a lot of firefighters all the time, and the importance to them of doing this in a way that makes sure that them taking care of us is done well and done so that they can do their jobs safely. And to me, that's critically important. And so I hope we analyze that well. I appreciate Chief Skinner's new look at how to address things downtown. And I'm vamping and waiting here for him to come to the screen, but I do have a question for Chief Skinner with his approach scenario. Oh, there he is. All right. Thank you, sir. I hear an awful lot from people about how when we staff, especially police response, but many of our strategies around downtown, often those are done strictly during the day. And a lot of the negative things that occur downtown happen overnight. I'm wondering if you might address that point just a little bit with your strategy.
Sure. Downtown certainly has a couple of different personalities based on time of day, day of week. There's no question about that. One of the things that we have not been very good at EPD since I've been here, and some of this has to do with staffing numbers, is that the downtown team is often the first team that we look to backfill our patrol staff to handle our 911 calls for service throughout the city. And when we do that, we leave them short. And when we leave them short, then it feels like we're not able to adequately respond. Two things are going to happen in this next biennium that we're really, really focusing on as we continue to hire police officers. Number one is stabilizing patrol with a number that is actually deeply rooted in data around the number of police officers we have that can respond to calls for service. The other one is to insulate the downtown team from not being the first place to look when we're short on patrol. The byproduct of that is having the full complement of the downtown team there, absent sick, vacation, training, those types of things that happen, but a full complement of downtown patrol officers to be able to feel like we have a better coverage both day and night.
Well, I appreciate your response. I think that's really intelligent. One of the things I mentioned right at the end of what I was saying was how many downtown business owners have issues over what occurred overnight while they weren't there and what greets them first thing in the morning. I just want to say I appreciate your willingness to look at new approaches to how to deal with some of the public safety issues downtown. I think the problem is actually worse than we discuss it, even though it's significant. There's a major employer downtown that I hesitate to say they employ hundreds of people. They're very visible. They're very much in the center of downtown. But they certainly employ several dozen people, and they'll be gone in a matter of weeks. They've already signed the papers to leave downtown. I think our downtown is having a significant issue around public safety. So I look forward to these and your ability to adapt as we go. Only some of this are issues around homelessness, of course. Many of them are issues around behavior. And again, I'm going to head back to that survey and say, I think it's behavior that drives people's perception of clean. Downtown behaviors are the issue. So I look to you for the majority of response there to address that issue. And when it comes to homes, I guess I'm going to appeal to my colleagues that what we're doing in this regard is spending a lot more money than we're seeing adequate steps of improvement with. And we should look to new sorts of ways to discuss the problem with the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keating, followed by Siobhan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inspired by Eliza's question, where does the money come from if we want to adjust something? So I have a few inquiries that might help lead to discovering where dollars come from to help save more essential programs and services, and possibly either pull from non-essential programs and events and activities, or explore how much we're investing in other pilot programs, such as the e-scooter program. Is there a way before we meet, or tonight, but before we meet, can we get how much the city has ponied up to participate in the e-scooter pilot program, please? In addition, can we get an indication how much we invest in public art installations? I recognize that there are a good portion of that that are going to be tied likely to federal dollars, but I'd like to see how much the city spends annually on public art. The examples that were given, and thank you, Ben, for doing so in regards to the downtown programs. One jumps out at the Halloween downtown as something that's in conflict with a for-profit Halloween event, the Trunk or Treat, put on by radio stations at Valley River Center. And I wonder if there are some efficiencies within some of these extracurricular programs and activities that might help point folks to where our for-profit partners or the chamber are doing certain events. If we could get a breakdown, you gave me several examples. I appreciate you doing so on the fly. National Dance Week, Halloween downtown, the concert at Kesey Square in particular. If we could get a Fiesta Cultural, which I don't want to take from by any means, but if we could get a breakdown of some of those, it might help me wrap my head around how much we're paying for programs and activities. In my last 40-some seconds, the city of Eugene, it's my understanding, took over licensing responsibilities for Eugene dogs from Lane County in 2012. I'm not certain if ever we've adjusted the dog licensing fees, the annual dog licensing fees, which are $42 for an unaltered dog, $18 for a spayed or neutered dog, or $12 for senior owners. The cat licensing fee, it's my understanding, is voluntary. I see a real opportunity for us to grow revenue, fill a hole by re-examining our pet licensing fees. Thank you.
Thank you. And Siobhan.
Thank you, Chair. I have just one, well, maybe not one, but a clarifying question. When someone does dial 911, who answers?
So anytime somebody dials 911, the first person to answer will be what we call a call taker. So understand, call takers and dispatchers are two completely different functions. A call taker will answer those calls for service and triage those calls and determine the right resource for that need. So when somebody calls 911, they have the ability to know that they're accessing police, fire, and CAHOOTS resources, explain to the call taker and answer a series of questions, and then that call taker sends it to the appropriate dispatcher based on the resource that's needed.
Okay, and then forgive me, where is the call taker's budget housed?
The entirety of Central Lane Communications, CLCC, which includes call takers, dispatchers, and all of the systems around our 911 technology, is housed in the EPD budget.
And then I do have, I believe it's a question for Peter really quick. Did I hear, or was it said that the CSI established a continuous source of funding for looking into our unhoused community?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a small portion of our 23-25 expected expenditure, but the Community Safety Initiative does provide ongoing funding for shelter and service programs.
Cool. And is that a new ongoing funding, or is there other sources of ongoing funding that's been around that I don't know about?
That's it. Community
Okay.
Safety Initiative. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I've seen hands pop up and down from both Councillor Clark and Eliza. Oh, I'm seeing a head shake from Eliza. Was Councillor Clark looking for a brief third round, or is the hand back down because we're good? Hands back up.
Back up, sorry, brother.
You're the only person then who has a third round request. So yeah, go ahead and then we can move to wrap up.
At some point, I think this committee ought to tackle the question, to what degree and why do we believe it's the city's responsibility to supplant the response to homelessness that is the county's proper responsibility? I await the information from our city manager, but I believe that we got a lot of one-time dollars from the federal government during COVID and in other places where we stepped up our response, either because some may not trust the county to do the job they would hope to do, or spend the amount of money they would hope to spend, or we had the opportunity to add to the solution. My hope is that we look at that comparatively to our other direct city responsibilities that some of my colleagues have mentioned, and say, to what degree is this level of spending appropriate versus some of the cuts we're debating? If we don't have that conversation in this room, then I think we're doing our community a disservice, because I think from my point of view, what we're spending is disproportionate. I personally don't believe the city has a responsibility to provide shelter for people. Now, we hear that an awful lot of public testimony, that it's the city's job. And I'd like to see us have the discussion, is it the city's job to provide shelter for someone who won't or cannot provide it for themselves? And if so, we need to talk about how we balance that in our other priorities on an ongoing basis, because we're spending an ever increasing amount, I believe, on this issue as if the answer to the question were a foregone conclusion. And I think we need to have that discussion before we get there. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to give a big picture response to that, in the sense of what should or shouldn't be discussed in this committee in my capacity as chair. I think that what you were describing just now is what I would consider a policy position. And I think the role of my understanding as chair is that the role of this committee is to make sure that we recommend to council a budget that through our eyes, we see as meeting the defined policy positions council has put forward. I would love, as a citizen member, I think all of our citizen members would love more opportunity to talk about policy, but that is not the purview of this committee. That is the ongoing conversation at every onboarding. So I think that's, from where I sit, I feel like that particular issue is pretty well established in current council's policy and that's maybe a council discussion. I see the city manager also wants to jump in on this.
You okay with that, Councillor Clark? All right. I think I appreciate that. And I think a really good place to maybe start this conversation is when we come to council to talk about the scope of what a revenue team might talk about, because homelessness and these services are going to be part of what we talk about. And what we were hoping would happen is that the presentations as part of the budget and sort of where you land in the end will help give some background and then context for that. But I think that's a totally valid conversation, and one we're going to be faced with, especially if we don't have new revenue.
By the way, one last thing, and it's insignificant compared to your point, that I think we should I think the new revenue committee, at least, if not more, should be talking about the idea of licensing bicycles and the fee that along the lines of what my friend Councillor Keating was saying. I think that us doing so provides a new source of revenue for a service that we already provide and how we deal with bicycles, A, and B, it would cut down on theft and identification of true ownership when bicycles are recovered. So that's something I hope the revenue committee at least discusses. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to give us a little bit of an overview of our next steps. And also I'm going to take this time to remind us of what the process looks like for how we're ultimately going as a committee to come to our final recommendation to council. So we have 2 more meetings scheduled. Next week's meeting is a roughly identical structure to this one with 3 more staff presentations, preceded by public comment and followed by another opportunity for us to discuss. The topics are the engine and squad approach, climate, and urban renewal and our frozen base. So those are the 3 presentations we'll be hearing next week. The following week will be the final meeting where we are ultimately going to put forward a motion to send a budget to council. That final motion can potentially be preceded by any motions anyone wants to make to modify and amend the budget. And there will also, to begin that meeting, before our deliberations, there will be a public hearing at that one as well. So that's the structure we're working with. I want to echo what Eliza said earlier, that it's really vital for us to be able to have that discussion effectively, that people who plan to make motions at that final meeting signal it earlier. I appreciate, Councillor Clark, you bring that up. If anyone else has motions that they expect to make on May 24th, I hope that they'll be mentioned in the May 17th meeting so that we can have some advanced warning. Also, as much as possible, I encourage anyone who wants to make a motion to work with staff on crafting it. If there isn't value in going rogue, it's really just a great way to sabotage yourself. Staff can help make sure that all the ducks are in a row on the motion being valid, making sure you're not accidentally pulling your funding from restricted source or any of that kind of thing, that what you want to do is something that the city can do. And they are helpful with that crafting. And when you work with staff ahead of time on those motions, we are able to include them on the agenda for the May 24th meeting, which gives everyone that opportunity to know it's coming, which will help you get votes for your motion. People are a lot less likely to vote for something if they feel that it's ambushing them in some way. So work with staff both so that we can have it on the agenda and people can know what we're going to be seeing, and to make sure that it is as sound as possible of a motion. And let us know at that May 17th meeting as much as possible if you think you plan to work on something. So that's sort of the gist, and we'll have more next week about the timing of when staff has sort of deadlines to hear from you to get it onto the agenda and all of that. So that's our structure. Motions on the 24th, culminating in a motion to advance whatever potentially amended or potentially not budget we want to council. For the general public, I will also at this moment mention that at that May 24th meeting, when we as a budget committee finalize our recommendation to council, that doesn't fully close the process, because there is then at council another public hearing on that proposed budget before council finalizes and passes it. So there is another opportunity for the public to weigh in beyond the budget committee's process here in May. So that is where we are and where we're going. That is the direction we're moving. As always, if you have any questions, whether it's about crafting a motion or just about the information, reach out to staff. But I do want to add a unique clarifier here. reach out to Liz. Vicky is on vacation after for these last 2 meetings of this budget cycle. And so it is, if you've just locked in your brain, reach out to Vicky like I have. For once, rewind, reach out to someone who's here. Liz is the primary point of contact for that, or of course, anyone in staff will work with you as needed and get you to the right person you need to talk to. But that's where we are and where we're headed. So I think we've concluded our discussion for tonight. I look forward to our meeting next week. 3 more undoubtedly very informative discussions on one topic that we talked already a lot about tonight. It'll be great to hear more about both about fire and about the other topics. But for now, I think we can go take some time to think about all the information we heard tonight, because there's a lot to think about. So I thank everyone for your evening, and at 8:30 p.m., this meeting is adjourned.
Nice job, Ty.